Welcome to Job Sharing and Beyond, the Future of Work podcast that goes beyond the traditional 9 to 5. I am Karen Tischler, speaker, consultant, and host of the show, where we hear from global experts every other week to discover innovative solutions and tips on how to remain a relevant employer in the future. Hello everybody, I am so appreciative having Bev Attfield as my guest today. Bev is the principal of workplace science at Jostle. Her bio states, meet a human who cares about other humans at work. Bev's curious about the experience people have at work and the role that leaders play in purposefully crafting engaging environments for people to flourish. At Jostle, she leads insights and understanding of workplaces, their cultures, and the people at the heart of them. Bev's a regular writer for the Jostle blog and host of the People at Work podcast and the Conversation at Work dialog series. When she's not in the workplace laboratory, she enjoys a good run, a well-brewed coffee, and a gnarly crossword. Welcome to the show, Bev.
Oh, thanks so much. It's awesome to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. So do I. And now for our listeners from all over the world, could you share with them where you're located today and any type of food or local site that they should be looking at?
Well, I live off the coast of Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. I live on a small island called Bowen Island, and it's got about 5,000 people. So it's about a 20-minute ferry ride from Vancouver. And what I love about my little part of the world is the unspoiled nature. And the site that I'd like to share or ask our listeners to imagine is a forest trail that takes you up to a beautiful viewpoint of the ocean. And it's just unspoiled. You will likely not run into another human, which I find just to be wonderful in this time when we need to reflect and find some time for ourselves. So that's what I value about my little part of the world.
Thank you so much for sharing, Bev. Now, you are the principal of workplace science at Jostle. Could you share with our listeners what you do?
Sure. Well, in very few words, I'm a human who cares about other humans at work. And so what that means for me in my role at Jostle is twofold. So Jostle is a tech company here in Vancouver, and the product that we're building is an employee enablement platform that helps us to give our customers the ability to connect their people to everything that matters to them during their workday and to help enable their people to do amazing work during that workday. So my role at Jostle is I have two parts. The first is that I am responsible for nurturing and crafting Jostle's own employee experience and the culture of learning and development that we are building for our people at Jostle. And then at the same time, I am interested in what's actually happening in the world of work. And I spend my days thinking about, exploring, researching. I have my own podcast with Jostle called People at Work. I have a virtual dialogue series which helps me talk to other people about what's actually going on. So, what's changing? What are the latest things that people are thinking about? What are the struggles that people are having? And then I bring that together in all sorts of shapes and forms, like blog articles and research papers that I share back into the community, because ultimately we're in this together and we've got to figure out how to create better work for people as we move into this new era of working together.
I've listened to episodes from your People at Work podcast, and for listeners who have not had a chance yet, could you maybe just highlight a few of what your guests have talked about? And also, it is such a wide spectrum of guests you have interviewed over the past.
Yeah, for sure. So People at Work has been live for over 2 years now. We've got almost 200 episodes, and that's a lot of conversations, right? I co-hosted with my peer at Jostle, Dustin Tissick, and together we talk to, like you said, all sorts of people. So our primary interest is in understanding what is going on for people at work. So we talk to coaches, consultants, authors, people who are in businesses at the front lines, leading things like the people function or C-suite functions, or people who are really engaged with and interested in how to build culture. So we cover a lot of topics. Most recently, there's been a lot of talk about hybrid work, remote work, the shifting face of work. How do we help people be included and connected in this new mode of operating? But we've also talked about things like psychological safety and how to support parents at work. We've also talked about leadership styles and trends. So really, it's quite a mixed bag. But ultimately, our purpose is to try and shine a light on people in the workplace and people who are trying to make work better, which fits quite nicely with some of the things that I'm passionate about.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you share this because, while I was doing my research about you, I saw that you have written long before the pandemic about employee engagement and company culture. And so like 6 years ago, I saw an article on LinkedIn that you wrote, "Your culture is how you treat people." And so could you maybe sort of highlight a few of your main insights over the years? And I know, that's a lot to ask in a few sentences, but sort of like, given the pandemic and what is happening, that would be really great.
Yeah, so over my career, I've been interested in how people work together. So my undergrad degree is in communications and psychology, and I've really always had an interest in organizational behavior and, what environments cultivate happy people and outstanding output. So how do people actually come together and do great things together? So I've thought about and explored and written extensively about people-centric work cultures, in particular, because I think that is where the answer lies for us. And that occurs at 3 different levels, as I understand it. So it's the individual level, the manager/leader/supervisor level, and then there's the organizational context. So as I think about the world of work and how people show up every day and the things they experience, what I've come to understand is that it really comes down to caring about others, and in its simplest form. And that is one of the simplest things that we do as humans for one another, right? So why should it be any different in the workplace context? So a lot of what I write about and research is centering on trying to understand how do we create more of that for people and for leaders and for organizational thinking as a whole. And it's not just about saying, oh, I care about you, as a manager to a direct report or a peer-to-peer, or in your workplace culture saying that we care about each other in your values. You actually have to put it into action through things like compassion, having a real interest in other people. And then I think a key thing that's emerging is having a growth mindset around not having all the answers, striving to learn and develop, and cultivating that growth mindset as an organization and as an ecosystem where people can actually come and it's tied to psychological safety as well. It's, creating those environments where people can come and feel free to make mistakes, take risks, be themselves. That all comes down, I think, to caring about people. So to answer your question about what the pandemic has done for this, I think for office workers, overnight, we shifted to working in remote mode, and that forced many of us, in fact, most of us, to basically turn our worlds upside down. In terms of the way that we would engage with work and our co-workers and our bosses and our workplace cultures. Suddenly, we were disconnected from them. And I think that's exposed weaknesses in leadership styles and in organizational culture and resources that we make available to our people. Now, we shouldn't forget that there were non-office workers who went through this shift as well. And I know a lot of what I talk about is office-centric, but I think it is important for us to realize that the workforce, doesn't only consist of people who go into offices every day. There are non-office workers who have had a much harder emotional and physical time, I believe, over the last 18 to 20 months. And plus, they've also felt some of these constraints around isolation, disconnection, burnout that a lot of office workers have felt. So, I think that if we're thinking about people-centric workplaces, we need to be thinking about all kinds of workers, first of all. And then what's central to that is, how are we actually attending to people's feelings of inclusion and belonging? And those two things have actually decreased significantly since the pandemic arrived as well. I recently wrapped up a research project with Dr. Erin Barth of Dialectic, and we were studying the impact of remote work on inclusion for people who'd newly shifted to being remote workers from being in office workers. And what we found is that people's sense of belonging and inclusion were impacted significantly. What was interesting is that people's productivity went up, but their feeling of being part of something that they cared about or that mattered went down. So what that was telling us is that in the past 18 months, due to the pandemic, we shifted as organizations and as managers into this transactional mode of thinking. We were in crisis mode, right? And when you're in crisis mode, you have an operational list of things you have to get done. And it's very easy to forget about the people aspect of what's happening in that scenario. So one of our recommendations coming out of our research was that we really need to shift away from transacting and start relating to people. And to bring this back to what I started saying is relating to people starts with expressing that you care about them. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of the things that I'm thinking about, and the opportunities that we have as leaders and organizations to address some of the things that were quite honestly going on in organizations before the pandemic arrived.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. And, also listening to your podcast, it's like all about, it feels more and more shifting from a manager that focuses 100% or predominantly on the numbers to becoming more of a coach. And for some managers, that is a completely, I would say, maybe mindset shift. And how are people being, helped to do this? Because I imagine this is not an easy shift when you're so used to meeting somebody and let's looking at the number to all of a sudden, well, how are you feeling? What can we do to support you with the current situation? So from your research and experience, what are sort of maybe best practices that organizations have done to create this more of a coach maybe feeling?
Yeah, gosh, I think that the pressure is on for managers and people who are in people reporting capacities right now, and has been the case for, since the pandemic began. I do think that it is going to be a challenge for some managers to move out of that transactional way of thinking, because it is very task oriented. It allows you to just get on with things without getting involved in the messy stuff. One of the things that I've tried to do more of in the past year, and admittedly, I feel like I'm probably on the relational end of things already. So that's my nature to sort of go towards the emotional, affective side of things. But I have been trying to get more in front of people and really understand what's happening for every individual, because that's the other thing here is you can't paint everyone with the same brush and say everyone is feeling isolated, everyone is feeling disconnected, everyone has got children at home that they're trying to deal with, right? That's not the case. People are feeling this anxiety, excitement, opportunity, lack of opportunity to different degrees, right? So you've got to approach people as individuals, and it can start with as simple as just a quick conversation, like, how are you doing really? Tell me about one interesting thing that happened to you today. What's the one thing that's really irritating you right now? You don't have to start in on this, hour-long lie on my couch and I'll, be your psychologist for the next 60 minutes, right? It's just about showing that you actually care and that you're paying attention to somebody. One of the things that we tried to do at Jostle right from the very beginning was encourage our team leads, that's what we call our managers, they're team leads in our environment, to really take note of the cues that people were signaling that might lead us to understand that they're not doing well or that they are actually thriving. And just that little shift in thinking around, just notice those small things. Is somebody not coming to the meetings that they used to arrive at? Or are they arriving at meetings, but they're not putting their camera on? Are they missing their deadlines? Can it go for days when you don't actually have even a hello from that person? Right. So I think for managers, it's really about noticing the small things and being focused on individuals and not making assumptions about groups of people.
Yeah. And so one other question, as I'm big on transferable skills, especially from, caregiving, care work, volunteering, are there, managers who you've seen that are starting to use these skills, which they might not have originally sort of necessarily maybe thought about, to how do I deal with a youth group, or how do I deal with my own children if I want to encourage them to tell me something that maybe initially they are either reluctant to or might not even necessarily have the words for. And by creating, as you said, a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah, look, I think it's easier said than done, for sure. And I think that it is dependent on the leader or the manager's willingness to have self-awareness about themselves, first of all, and where they believe they need to grow and improve. Because if you don't have that insight or desire yourself to improve, then you can't necessarily coach somebody else around how to change or adapt or become more skilled or better at something. So I think that's the first thing that we like to see in our team leads, is the self-starting mentality. But in terms of seeing actual change, yes, I've definitely seen that in our own environment. I think that you've got to give people the leeway to try things in their own time and to the degree that they are comfortable in trying things. We have a very entrepreneurial environment at Jostle, so I think we might be, we might have an advantage in that is our basis of operating, that we expect people to co-create with one another. We expect people to take responsibility and be accountable for the things they're doing from a project task perspective. And we expect the same thing from managers and team leads to do that as well. So, but I will say that it's definitely been difficult because of not being in person with one another is also
Right.
a challenge, right? But it's not an excuse. Like I don't believe you need to be in person with one another in order to manage well or coach well or be engaged with your team. I think that's an easy out for managers. So, I think in sum, I would just say that, we need to have clarity around what we expect of our leaders, and we need to be providing managers and team leads with the support that they need in order to support their people.
Yeah. No, you're raising really, really good points. And as you're talking about remote work, now, one of the things, the big debates are now happening of returning back to the work or in some form of a hybrid model. And you have been part of a task force to put together for Jostle the hybrid work policy. And it's, you've done a lot of research about it, and I've read your main points about putting this together and best practices. So could you share with our listeners what you have come up with and points that you have found as best practice?
Yeah, for sure. So at Jostle, we were a tech company. Before the pandemic, we had a flexible way of working in that we expected our workers or our jostlers to be in our office in Vancouver, 4 days out of 5. That was what we asked for. We have a few people who've always been remote, but for the most part, our people are in Vancouver and we were in our office. We use our own intranet extensively to stay connected. So we were lucky enough that when, early March 2020, when we, as the senior team, announced that we were going home overnight, basically, people basically just had their laptops and they arrived at their, dining room tables, kitchen counters, bedrooms, whatever, on the next morning, and they carried on working, right? We were lucky in that respect. But as time has unfolded, we have really changed our position around what we think we need to have in our organization in order to be successful with one another. And we had held on to this feeling that we needed to be in person to collaborate and do productive work. We proved that wasn't the case over the past 18 months. We could be as innovative, creative, or more in this new way of working. So we've made the decision to be a hybrid workplace going forward, which means that we are remote capable, but we will maintain our physical office in Vancouver. And really, so what that means is we're going to have a bit of a mix of in-person and remote working for most of our people. We did write up a hybrid work policy, and some of the key points of it are this notion of giving every jostler maximum flexibility while encouraging opportunities for in-person interaction when we think it actually makes sense. So we're not going to ask jostlers to come into the office and sit at their desk and work on a spreadsheet or type code or, do whatever they could do within the comfort and, the convenience of their own home. So the times when we will ask people to come together will be for, once a quarter, we have something at Jostle called Jostle Fest, which is basically a celebration of what we've achieved over the past 3 or 4 months, or for social events like our company picnic or our Christmas party or whatever the case may be. So there has to be a really good reason for us to bring everybody together. The other thing we've been really clear about is our limitations. So we are a Canadian company and we are not legally allowed to operate outside of Canada. We don't have jurisdiction in any other country. So the requirements are that if you work for Jostle, you need to be living and working in Canada. So, that was something we were very clear about. And, that's going to be a topic of interest in the coming years, right? Because a lot of companies have suddenly flung their doors open and said, we can hire from anywhere.
Right.
But really, can you actually do that as a company, right? So you've got to be honest about what you can physically do and legally do within the confines of your business operations. The other thing we decided within the confines of the policy was we were not going to mandate what different teams chose to do in terms of working together. So even though I said previously, we're going to have these milestone events through the year where we ask everybody to come together, we're not going to mandate every team needs to work in the office once a week for 2 days a week. Every team is allowed to decide what works for them. If they decide that they're going to come into the office twice a week, great. If they decide once every 2 months is great for them, well, go for it. We as senior leaders are not going to be asking anyone to live up to the norms or rituals of another team or according to the whim of the executive. So I feel like that is a really important part of our policy because it really doubles down on this flexibility and this sort of entrepreneurial way that we operate at Jostle. A key part of our policy is that we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. We are trying this as something new for our company, and it's likely to change. We've been really upfront from the beginning with our employees that we do not have all the answers. This is unscripted. Every single leader and every single employee is in new territory here. So we've written our policy in the spirit of that, being open and transparent and being clear that we will share information and we'll be willing to change the policy if something transpires that proves that what we've got in place doesn't actually support us or help us achieve our objectives as a company. So, I think that those are some really critical things that other organizations should be thinking about. And I know that there's a lot of companies that have been very public about what they're doing with their hybrid work structure and how they're approaching hybrid work. But I think it's really important for every organization to, listen to what's going on out there, take a look, but really you've got to build something that suits you and your people. And that's the key part there. It's got to suit your people. Because if they can't work the way they want to, they won't work with you anymore. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, these are so many good points you're raising. And now, as I'm such a big proponent of flexible work, in particular, like, job sharing and part-time work, in order to enable also professionals to return back to paid work who, because of caregiving, responsibilities or other reasons, cannot work full-time. I'm hoping that this more of a, I would call it trust work, then perpetuates and maybe enable more organization to look at job sharing, which a lot of the time is, it requires trust between the two parties working together, as well as the respective manager and colleagues to, feel confident that this all can work. So I'm curious if you have either heard or seen more of that, maybe more part-time or job sharing is in the horizon or is being mentioned as a possibility of a type of flexible work.
Yeah, I think that's the next part of our evolution in organizations. And I think it's already happening. The pandemic has obviously accelerated that shift in the mindset. And I think that's a great thing. I think it's a good thing for employees, but I think it's a really good thing for organizations to be shaken up and to think about different ways of bringing people together to do great work, right? There are benefits for both parties. I agree with you. I think trust is crucial for it to succeed, and the trust has to happen from both sides, right? I don't think we are there yet, but I think that there is definitely an appetite for change that isn't going to go away. And honestly, I think that it is an employees market and will continue to be so. And we've all heard, the turnover tsunami, there are a number of other phrases for it. The great resignation is another one. And that is real, right? And I think that this is like, for the first time in almost a century, we have an opportunity to actually reframe work. We have an opportunity to actually understand what helps people thrive and then build structures in our society, of which workplaces and organizations are one structure, to actually support, not suppress, the human potential, right? So I just don't understand why we would even want to go back to normal. Like, it doesn't even, for me, the first thing that I started to think about when the pandemic arrived was, yes, this is a terrible thing, but wow, what an amazing opportunity we've got, right? What does this mean for humanity, for us to be able to reframe things? Like, this doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
I think it's not since the industrial age have we actually had a chance to have a significant impact on how we bring people together to do productive work. So, I think flexible work and ways of job sharing and finding opportunities for people to piece together interesting ways to add to their lives is critical. And I think those leaders who can, and organizations who can build their environments to support this, they're the ones who are going to win through this for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It's sort of such a revolutionary time, I would even say, to really define what is work, and not just paid work, but all the aspects of somebody's life. And you were talking about thriving, and I'm going to shift a little bit of the gears, because what you have done in the past, I just found really amazing. And for people who don't know you yet, you've gone on a extended travel journey across many countries, and I was just fascinated reading about it. So if you could please share a bit about that part of your history.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very a time of my life that I look back with fondness, and I miss my days of traveling. But basically, my husband and I decided to take a 2-year sabbatical 6 or 7 years ago. We had experienced a very close loss in our lives. We lost a baby son, and we were grieving through this process. And we both knew that work didn't matter to us anymore in the way that it once did. And we needed to do something completely different to actually set us off on a new course in our lives. And so what we decided to do was take this time and go traveling. So we sold everything. We got backpacks, basically packed those backpacks and hit the road in Central America and proceeded to travel through 30 countries over the course of 2 years. And we're also avid runners, and we eat a plant-based diet. So we wanted to explore how could we run in some of the most amazing remote places in the world, and how do we explore cultures through cuisine and this very different way of approaching eating, because, you know, being plant-based isn't that obvious in some countries in the world. So anyway, that's what spurred our journey. Through that process, we had some ups and downs. It's, you learn a lot about yourself. Fortunately, I had a really wonderful, partner in my husband, who is my best friend and a great life companion. So, we were perfectly suited for the journey. But we encountered some difficulties. When we were in Chile, our backpack got someone cut into the backpack and stole our travel wallet and our camera, including my husband's passport. So here we were, stranded in this small village, en route to the next destination. And suddenly we had to figure out how to get around without a passport. So, those kinds of things, when you're in an adventure like that, cause you to think on your feet, causes you to reflect on, how stable you feel in the moment, how you respond. So we learned a lot. And I think some of the things that, I know that you're very passionate about transferring skills from parts of your life into your work life. And so maybe I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I feel I learned that have helped me as I returned and integrated back into a more conventional existence. The first thing I think was patience. I'm not naturally a patient person, but when you're in the middle of, South America, and you don't have a consistent timetable for the next bus or train or means of transport, you might spend 5 hours waiting for something to come along. So, what do you learn in that 5 hours? Well, you learn how to be patient, and you learn how to deal with uncertainty and instability, and that requires flexibility, which I think is another skill that I learned. You obviously learn problem solving, thinking on your feet. The stolen passport example is one of those real life learning examples. I think another skill is how to relate to others. In particular, when you have a language barrier, how do you get your point across? How do you get help? How do you ask questions? How do you be respectful and be part of a culture rather than imposing yourself on that culture? I think is a really interesting lesson for the workplace context in particular. And then I think the last thing that I really am grateful for that I took away was just being in the moment and being very present in what you're doing and absorbing everything that's going on around you. And I feel like with the busyness of everyday life and getting caught up in deadlines and tasks and things that are being placed, or demands that are being placed on you in the conventional way of living, we forget to appreciate and embrace those special and non-special moments in our lives. So I definitely try to hold on to that as much as I could when I returned from our journey.
Thank you so much for sharing this so authentically. That's, wow. What I was trying to sort of also understand, and you've mentioned it before, that it is really an employee market now. And one of the recent guests I've had are two Gen Z students who have put together in the US Project Matriarchs, basically to use the power of their generation to increase the demand on organizations to put more emphasis on caregiving, and to have also, senior leaders start talking about what they do as far as volunteering, care working, caregiving outside of the normal work environment, to emphasize the importance of doing this, which kind of leads back to where we started originally, with a manager becoming more of a coach. So now I'm curious, have you sort of, encountered that also in the research you have done, that is another shift that is happening right now?
Yeah, I've seen two things that I think support your question. The first is, I think there's a growing need for organizations to be focused on social impact, not only externally in terms of their, corporate social responsibility and their attitudes and their actions around how they support people outside of their organizations, but social impact enablement within their organizations, for how do they actually support people and give people a voice within the organization. So I think that is something that is going to become more and more pressing for organizations, especially as we have a generation like Gen Z, where they're really looking for work with impact. They want their life and the things they do with their life to have meaning. So organizations need to not only respond to that, it's, you need to be proactive about that. Like, don't wait for your employees to ask for that. You've got to be thinking about, how do you create that environment now? So that's the one thing. I think the other thing is around, the caregiving side of thing, I think, is interesting. I've not heard it articulated the way that you articulated, but how I understand that and think about it is, it's really part of the employee experience that you're creating. And it comes back to my attitude around, how do we care for people in organizations that we talked about right in the very beginning. And, that comes down to not only the culture that you create, but to what extent are you actually supporting people in the things that are happening in their lives. And Bumble, which is the dating app, recently announced that they were going to be introducing extended support in terms of leave for their employees. So, leave for new parents, whether, it doesn't matter what your circumstances, whether it's your own child or an adopted child, fostering a child. They were going to provide compassionate leave due to miscarriage, and they were going to be giving caregivers time off to go and support their family members. So if you have an aging parent or a disabled child, you will be given time to go and help those people within your lives. And, I haven't seen another company, and I'm sure that there are examples out there, but that are being as vocal and are drawing the line the way that Bumble has. And I applaud them for it. I think that is the way that we need to be going as organizations, right? And I think an interesting question starts to be posed is, what is the role of an organization in society? Like, in terms of caring for people, given the amount of time that people spend within that environment. So I think that's going to lead us into some very interesting debates in the coming months and years. And I think we have the pandemic to thank for that, quite honestly, because it's accelerated those conversations.
I so agree. And thank you so much for sharing. And now, we've talked about so many different aspects. Is there anything you would like to share with our listeners that we have not covered yet?
I think just to the point of caring, I think if that feels too kind of warm and fuzzy to people, and maybe there are some leaders who, as we talked about earlier, that's not their mode of operating. Like, they don't want to be caring for people. Like, that might seem strange and foreign to them. I think it might be easier to think about caring as a category of inclusion and belonging, right? So how do we instill a mindset of putting people first and welcoming their individual needs and what they actually want as part of their lives? And that's a really small step with huge impacts, right? If that's all you can manage in your own shift as a leader, I think that'll all get us quite a bit further along this process of getting us to be people first and people oriented within organizations. And one quick thing I wanted to add is that I'm not advocating that it's people over profits either. Like, I know that there is that debate and that concern out in the world. You can have both of those things, and you should have both of those things. And maybe if your organization is a nonprofit or is a charity or is not actually in business to make a profit, the profits that you're going to see are the things that you can return to your shareholders and your stakeholders. But to get those profits, you have to look after your people first. So, I think that those leaders out there who are resistant to this people first idea also need to understand, really, what does it mean for you on the bottom line of your business if you can change your mindset around putting people first, right?
Yeah, well, that's really, really important. Now, Bev, how can people find you on social media?
So I'm most active on LinkedIn. That's where I live and breathe and engage with people. So I'd love, if anybody would like to reach out, you can find me. I'm just under Bev Attfield. That's where I'm at on LinkedIn. And I'd love to carry on the conversation. So reach out to me there, send me a DM. You can also send me an email, bev@jostle.me. If you'd prefer to email me, that's great. And yeah, if there's anything I can shed further light on in something that I might have touched on today, or if I can help anyone in any way, please, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much. That was such a great conversation. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this open and authentic platform, and thank you for everything you're doing on your podcast to highlight some of these really crucial issues for us in the workplace right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We hope you gained valuable insights and new ideas. To keep listening to future episodes, please head over to iTunes or your favorite player and subscribe and give it a rating. We would very much appreciate a review and for you to share it on social media, so more people can start innovating in how they offer employment. Until the next time, goodbye.